Good evening. I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your friendly integrative gynecologist, and I'm here today to talk to you about a very serious issue. What are birth control pills? Now, I'm sure you think you know what they are, but I cannot believe how many doctors I speak to who have no clue what they are prescribing when they prescribe birth control pills. Before I even talk about that, I want to introduce myself to any of you out there who have not heard any of my talks or have met me before. So I am somewhat unique. I am doubly boarded in both OBGYN and in the new field of integrative medicine. So I'm board-certified. I run an integrative medical practice in Irvine, California, and I serve as the medical director. And I lead my group of holistic practitioners, two naturopaths, a fitness nutrition specialist, a massage therapist, and an esthetician. And I guide them to help every one of our patients to achieve optimal health in the most efficacious and least harmful, and hopefully the simplest way as possible, harnessing our own body's natural healing mechanisms to enable health to be reestablished. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty here about birth control pills. I need to tell you, first of all, that I am absolutely not in favor of unwanted pregnancies. That is a huge deal. And I am also very realistic. Reproduction is the prime directive of life. And people are sexual creatures. Every living creature is designed to have sex in its own way and to reproduce. So it's a huge and powerful drive of humans, and I'm not going to stop it. And so it's going to happen, and people will have sexual activity. And if they're not doing something, there will be reproductive repercussions, and there will be babies that are made. And we don't want babies to come into the world that are unwanted. So I want to make it clear that what is the prime purpose of my speaking about birth control pills. And later next week, I'm going to speak about intrauterine devices, and I'll touch on implantables as well. It's because what I want to do is change the entire discussion. No one and nothing in this world should ever be so powerful that it's untouchable. Nothing should ever be too big to fail if it's really not doing the job properly. So birth control pills, for example, came into existence many, many years ago. We're talking about like close to 60 years ago they were first developed, and they came on the market back in, like in the 1960s. And they were quite different then in that initially birth control pills were sequential, meaning that you took estrogen mimics, not estrogen, and then you took progesterone mimics, not real progesterone, and you took it in a way that somewhat mimicked a normal menstrual cycle, but there was no normal menstrual cycle. There's nothing natural or normal about oral contraceptives. In fact, their very existence is to prevent the normal hormonal function of a female and to prevent procreation. We do not want to have reproduction. We don't want there to be ovulation. We don't want there to be a pregnancy. And so the chemicals that are in birth control pills are not hormones. So I talk to people all the time and I say, so what's in a birth control pill? And their response to me is, there's hormones in a birth control pill. There is not one bit of a hormone in a birth control pill. They are really technically, and this is acknowledged not by me, but by the US government and by people in environmental medicine and the environmental world, that these are endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals actually designed to interfere and to disrupt the normal hormone functioning of a female. So let's make this perfectly clear right up front. There is not a single hormone in a birth control pill. So what is in a birth control pill if they're not hormones? Well, the most common of the estrogen mimics, and really it is an estrogen endocrine disruptor. Officially, as I said, if you go to the toxicology website produced by the National Institutes of Health, it lists ethinyl estradiol, which is the vast predominant of all the estrogen mimics that are in oral contraceptives, in birth control pills, is the chemical called ethinyl estradiol. Now, the real estrogen that's produced by the ovaries is called 17-beta estradiol. So it has a similar sound. It has the word estradiol, but that is not what it is. It is not estradiol. It is ethinyl estradiol, and that added molecule changes it completely. So it does bind to estrogen receptors, but so do many other chemicals like bisphenol A and phthalates and mercury and lead. They are estrogen endocrine disruptors as well. But can you imagine going to a pharmacy and getting a prescription filled for bisphenol A? Well, guess what? Bisphenol A, which is what's in plastics and in the liners of cans. It used to be in baby bottles until a few years ago. It's banned in Europe as a toxic endocrine disruptor. And it's also used to be in sealants that we painted on our children's teeth to try to prevent cavities. And it is in those papers that you pick up when you go to the airport, your boarding passes. That is coated in bisphenol A. So bisphenol A tried to get on the market initially as a pharmaceutical, but it got beaten out by another endocrine disruptor called diethylstilbestrol. That's a whole different story. But the bottom line is that no one would think of prescribing bisphenol A now as a pharmaceutical, but it tried to be that, as unbelievable as that seems. And ethinyl estradiol is in the same family as bisphenol A. In fact, if you go to the environmental literature, which I go to all the time to see what they're up to, you will see that ethinyl estradiol, the chemical estrogen mimic that's in oral contraceptives, is treated the same way as bisphenol A and often studied in the same studies as bisphenol A, BPA, as an endocrine disruptor. And what are they looking at, the environmentalists? They're looking at what ethinyl estradiol, along with bisphenol A, but we'll focus right now on ethinyl estradiol because that's what's in birth control pills. They're looking at what it's doing to wildlife because, as you may know, our water treatment plants are not designed to take out pharmaceuticals. This is a huge problem because pharmaceuticals now are getting into our lakes and rivers by the droves. And I don't know about you, but I do not want to drink pharmaceutical water, but that's what's happening. And our poor wildlife, they're swimming in it. So all the pharmaceuticals are going into the water treatment plant. People, throw them down the toilet and they actually excrete them and all kinds of things. And they're getting into our water and they do not get taken out by the water treatment plants. That's not what they were designed for. They were designed for treating bacteria, not our pharmaceuticals. So our lakes and rivers now are filled with the components of birth control pills. And this is playing havoc with the wildlife. And that's what they're looking at. And they're calling it, the environmentalists who are looking at what these drugs, these chemicals are doing to wildlife is really astounding. They're changing gender, they're changing sexual behavior. When it gets into the wildlife that are pregnant, it's changing the way that the offspring are developing. It's having basically tremendous and catastrophic effects on the wildlife. And actually, many of the environmentalists are putting warnings into their papers saying, what is this doing to humans? And even if birth control pills were 100% safe, which they're not, even if they were, just think about what we're doing to our planet by putting these chemical endocrine disruptors into our waters, into our lakes and rivers. And then we're eating the fish and they're altered. They're full of these chemicals. So we know that these create havoc in wildlife and they're very, very worrisome that it's filling our environment. But what about humans? Let's talk about humans. So now I'm telling you that what are in birth control pills, the pretend estrogen, ethinyl estradiol, is not an estrogen. It's an endocrine disruptor. It binds to estrogen receptors and it has varied effects depending on where in the body it is. Well, it turns out that our GI tracts are filled with these unbelievable bacteria that are called the microbiota, which make up the microbiome. It turns out that estrogen, real estrogen, is very important in women to maintaining the health of the microbiome and the immune system. A huge percentage, 70 to 90% of the immune system of the entire human body is enveloping our intestinal tract. It's called the GALT, gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And this tissue, this immune-containing tissue, is very key to creating what is called immune tolerance. It allows our immune system to understand what is foe and what is friend. And when you put in estrogen endocrine disruptors like birth control pills, it alters the entire environment. The gut is different, the microbiome changes, and the cells of the immune system are also altered. Also have estrogen receptors, and they're impacted in a negative way by birth control pills. So what happens is that women on birth control pills have higher rates of certain autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases, by the way, are really on the upswing. So women on birth control pills, and this is published in the literature, have higher rates of Crohn's disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis. Major autoimmune diseases are increased in the incidence in women on oral contraceptives. This is not a little matter. We know that we don't prescribe birth control pills to women who have serious cardiovascular risk. For example, smokers, because it increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Well, women who are also at risk, like women with diabetes, also have increased risk. And what about women with polycystic ovary syndrome? They also have increased risk. We know that birth control pills tend to cause high blood pressure. So we know that it interferes with the normal functioning of the cardiovascular system. This may also be related to what goes on in the gut, but also to the arteries. It turns out that the arteries are healthy because of estrogen. There are receptors in arteries that are designed to deal with estrogen, and estrogen is a key component of the function of an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase, which creates nitric oxide in arteries. Nitric oxide is essential for having flexible, healthy arteries. So when you don't have real estrogen, when you replace it with an endocrine disruptor like ethinyl estradiol, it can cause less production of nitric oxide and you get stiffer arteries. There was one study quite a number of years ago that came out of Belgium that looked at the arteries in terms of plaque formation. They compared women who'd been on different birth control pills for a decade versus women who were never, and they were matched according to age and weight and so on. They found that the women who'd been on the oral contraceptives for a decade had 50% more plaque in their arteries. So birth control pills are not good for cardiovascular health. And we know that women in general have much lower rates of cardiovascular problems compared to men up until menopause, because estrogen is protective. And with the loss of estrogen with menopause, women get more hypertension, they get more cardiovascular problems. Well, these things are accelerated in women who are on oral contraceptives because they're not getting real estrogen. And what about the progestins that are in the birth control pills? Well, one of the most common ones, for example, is levonorgestrel. It's not progesterone. It is an endocrine disruptor. In fact, it will work on the receptors for not just progesterone, but also testosterone and aldosterone, but not in the ways that real hormones work. They work in different ways. In fact, when I say an endocrine disruptor, What that means is that it's something that interferes with hormones in a whole variety of ways. It can attach to the receptor and create a different effect. It can be metabolized differently. It can alter the receptors themselves. It can cause production to be changed. So estrogen and progesterone endocrine disruptors can have a myriad of effects throughout the body. Remember, estrogen and progesterone are not just about reproduction. This is really a key point. They're about life itself. Estrogen and progesterone have receptors all over the body. Estrogen existed and does in invertebrates, in animals like clams that have no reproductive functions that are similar to humans whatsoever, but yet they have estrogen. Why is that? Because estrogen regulates metabolism. Estrogen was always about survival and still is. So estrogen is doing a myriad of functions all over the female body. So and reproduction is key and linked to every other metabolic function of the female body. So reproduction and metabolic health, and metabolism is everything. Cognitive health, cardiovascular health, immune health, everything is about metabolism. It's all linked together. We are one whole. We are not this and then suddenly reproduction. So when you interfere with reproductive functions and you give chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and alter the normal hormonal function of women, you are not just interfering with reproduction. You're interfering with every other function in some way, many of which we're just now discovering. Women on birth control pills have higher rates of depression. There are estrogen receptors in the brain. Women on birth control pills tend, especially if they start them young, do not get maximum bone density produced. They tend to have more issues with osteoporosis because during the bone development years, you need to have optimal estrogen. And they've done studies out of Austria that showed that the lower the dose of the pretend estrogen in the oral contraceptives, the worse the bones developed. They did a study showing that women who were normally functioning, had regular menstrual cycles, developed much better bone density than women who were on the lowest dose and the medium dose birth control pills. And the lowest dose did the worst. There's been a tendency all throughout everything in our medical world that demonizes estrogen. There's this idea that the less you have, the better. That is not true. What you want is a normal amount. You don't want too much, but you certainly don't want too little. And in birth control pills, what they have been trying to do is give the lowest amount of the ethinyl estradiol, which of course is not estrogen anyway, but they're giving the lowest amount. And although it is not estrogen, it does bind to receptors. So it has a little bit of benefit on the bone. But now they want to give the lowest amount, which actually causes not only bone not to grow, but it can actually regress. So you can imagine giving this to a young teenager who needs to grow bone, and it actually will prevent the bone from getting stronger. They will never have a healthy skeletal system. So what else would we want to learn about birth control pills? Well, the levonorgestrel, which is a very commonly found in birth control pills, well, it can be quite dangerous. I hate to tell you this. It's rare. Thank goodness it's rare. But it can cause intracranial hypertension. Yes, in fact, unfortunately, there are a whole bunch of lawsuits going on this particular thing. And they now put a warning on it, on the birth control pills with it, that it can cause this problem, which gives high blood pressure in the brain, which is a huge problem. So what other things can happen with birth control pills? Well, they increase clotting. So you have a higher risk of getting blood clots. Okay, and what else? You can also get, in terms of blood clots, there have been occasional cases. I am so sorry. I was just checking that. I was wanting to make sure that it wasn't something with my production. But what I wanted you to know is that when women take birth control pills, they can increase their clotting, which can also cause what's called central retinal occlusion. So they can actually go blind. Now, fortunately, these are not common situations, but people have to know that if they can happen, they will happen to someone. So what are we going to do? What I want to do is just open up the discussion. I want people to just recognize that birth control pills are, number one, not hormones. They are chemical endocrine disruptors. And as such, they will impact on all sorts of things throughout the entire human female body. Do I prescribe birth control pills? I do. I do prescribe birth control pills. Not that I want to, but because I know that sometimes I have limited options. So what I want is to encourage that more types of birth control options be developed. Only if we recognize and accept that birth control pills are interfering with primary functions of the female body, that they are incorporating endocrine disruptors that affect wildlife, that affect the development, that impact on cardiovascular health and musculoskeletal health and emotional health and gut health and immune health, that some women will have serious problems. And one of the things I did not mention yet is that now there's published data out of Finland that oral contraceptives will increase the risk of breast cancer 34%. And yet we're giving it to children. We're giving it to young teens. As young as 13 and 14 are getting oral contraceptives. Some women are on oral contraceptives for over 30 years straight. Their whole lives, their whole reproductive lives are spent on oral contraceptives. They never have normal hormones in their bodies. The data to talk about this kind of a thing. There is none. So we just need to open up the discussion that, in fact, oral contraceptives are not the optimal thing. We have to use them. Sometimes we have no other options, but we need to push our scientists, our researchers to look for better options, things that are not going to interfere with the normal functioning, the normal hormones of a female. So that's it for today. I hope I didn't scare you too much. I just want to educate you that what we're doing needs to be discussed. We need to be honest about what we're putting in women's bodies. Nobody understood any of this when birth control pills were developed decades ago. No one immediately, well, very few, I can't say no one, few women will immediately die from being on birth control pills. These are subtle changes, like being exposed to other endocrine disruptors like Bisphenol A. No one just dies from them right away, but they harm our bodies. They harm all aspects of our bodies. Let's find better ways to control our prime directive of life, reproduction. Let's see if we can find things that are more physiologic, that are more basically in alignment with our female bodies. So we're going to continue this discussion next week when I talk about IUDs and implantables. And thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you same time next week on Thursday. And have a wonderful evening and take care. And anything that you need as far as questions, you can text them and then I'll try to answer them next week. So take care and have a great night.